A woman with light brown hair calmly rejects an offer to become an exclusive trainer for a man in a red uniform. The man with dark hair listens intently to her refusal while she remains resolute despite her anxiety. Tap. He calmly sets his cup down and asks her a single, pointed question. Why not? He questions if the pay or terms were insufficient as she sits nervously with her hands clasped. Leaning closer, he assures her that he could have adjusted the terms to her liking. She's overwhelmed by his charisma and the stunning realization that this powerful man is a duke. She thinks to herself that in any story, this handsome and imposing duke would be the main character. The duke finds her rejection troublesome, noting that a certain Kazan has never shown aversion to a trainer before. Still, she apologizes and firmly declines his offer, feeling out of her depth in this unfamiliar world. She resolves to live a quiet life as a nobody, knowing she must avoid protagonist types like him. She recalls her past life, remembering how 5 years ago she realized she'd been reborn into a novel she once read. Her initial hopes were dashed by the harsh reality that she was nothing more than a poor orphan. But she found a new family, raised by a woman who was like a real mom alongside other sweet children. 5 years have passed since she remembered everything, and her life is now set against the backdrop of a grand castle. She loads a cart with fresh produce and sets off for the day. Looking back with a confident smile, she reveals she now works as a dragon trainer. Growl! A majestic white dragon appears, a wondrous sight in this fantasy world. She lovingly embraces the dragon, admitting she has always been obsessed with such creatures. In this world, dragons are an everyday sight, serving as livestock, weapons of war, or beloved pets. Dragons here are diverse. Some are gentle, some breathe fire, while others swim through the seas. Each species possesses unique traits and powers, capable of crushing buildings as if they were cookies. Wondering what chance a human has against them, she firmly says no, as her white dragon playfully nudges her. For humans and dragons to coexist peacefully, she knows training is a must, sternly ordering the dragon to sit. Whew! She finishes cleaning the courtyard, satisfied with her work. Calling for Rue, she's met with indifference as the white dragon ignores her, surrounded by imaginary cats. She tempts Rue with the promise of treats, and suddenly, the dragon's ear perks up with interest. Lydia does a little dance, much to Rue's adorable confusion. Stretching elegantly, she's met by Rue, who affectionately nuzzles against her leg with a soft purr. Overcome with emotion, Lydia rewards Rue with a treat for being such a good girl. Rough. Rue lets out a happy bark, and with the chores done, Lydia decides it's time for them to eat. Lydia smiles fondly, relieved to see her dragon looking so healthy and happy. She remembers how Rue refused to eat when she first arrived, a stark contrast to her appetite now. With feeding complete, the next step is to begin riding training. Suddenly, a panicked voice shouts for trainer Lydia, and she turns in alarm. Rushing to the source of the commotion, Lydia asks what's wrong as Rue looks on curiously. A distraught young man cries uncontrollably, desperately begging for her help. He reports that the rock-will dragon under Trainer Thompson is rampaging, and Lydia fumes. That bastard again. Rock-will dragons are described as huge, gentle, stone-like creatures covered in a mossy carpet, but the narration ominously trails off with, or so they say, Rag! A furious rock-will dragon roars, its eyes glowing with rage. Eek! A terrified blonde man demands Trainer Thompson handle the situation, but Thompson fearfully argues back. The blonde man shoves Thompson directly toward the rampaging dragon. Lydia arrives heroically atop Rue, making a dramatic entrance. The blonde man angrily demands to know who called for her, but she retorts that someone had to fix his mess. As he yells at her, Lydia sharply warns him to be quiet before he provokes the dragon even more. When he continues to shout, Lydia grabs his collar and challenges him to handle it himself, leaving him speechless. Shoving him aside, Lydia declares she'll just stick to her own training schedule and handle this herself. She stands her ground, bravely facing the enormous, enraged rock-will dragon. Realizing the immense danger, she has a moment of doubt, thinking, no way. Despite her fear, Lydia charges headfirst toward the rampaging beast. Lydia calmly offers a treat to the massive rock-will dragon, calling it a good girl. The enraged dragon stares down her offering, but Lydia reassures it that she means no harm. To her surprise, the dragon retracts its claw, leaving the treat untouched on the ground. The massive beast then gently nuzzles against her, seeking comfort. Stroking its head, Lytia soothes the whimpering dragon, praising it for being a good girl. She promises to remove the source of its pain, reaching toward its mossy back. Just as she thought, a painful sungrass seed is embedded in its skin, explaining its agony. The other trainers, including Thompson, watch in utter shock, unable to believe what they're seeing. The dragon suddenly thrashes in pain, throwing Lytia to the ground as someone screams her name. The other trainers rush to her side, anxiously asking if she's all right. Lying on the ground, Lytia reveals the sungrass seed she pulled out and is asked why it wasn't removed. Trainer Thompson flinches, horrified to realize the seed he was supposed to remove was still there. A superior furiously calls for an apprentice named Rick, then slaps him hard across the face, calling him an idiot. He screams at the fallen apprentice for his failure to manage the dragon, while Rick tearfully apologizes. Lydia steps in, telling Trainer Thompson to stop, and comforts the crying apprentice. As the dragon finally rests, Lydia wonders why the apprentice didn't know the basic procedure for removing sungrass seeds. Fuming, Trainer Thompson angrily demands to know what she is implying. Lydia states that whoever saddled the dragon without removing the seed is the one responsible for the rampage. She points a finger directly at Trainer Thompson, her eyes cold as she declares, "It was you." Cornered and flushed with rage, Thompson can only stammer, unable to deny the accusation. Pow! In his office, the director of the Ashar Training Center slams his fist down, demanding Lydia explain herself. Lydia stands her ground, arguing she did nothing wrong by handling a situation she was supposed to. He retorts that it wasn't her place to intervene, but her defiant expression shows she doesn't agree. The director reveals the reason for his anger. Thompson is backed by Count Harris, a major financial supporter. He warns Lytia to watch her words or risk dismissal, threatening her position and the orphanage she supports. Leaning forward, he reminds her that her career began with his scouting her skills, implying he can also end it. He leaves her with an ominous threat about needing his recommendation, making her feel utterly trapped. Alone and furious, Lydia clenches her fist, cursing the corrupt men in power. She reflects that even after being reborn in a fantasy world, little has changed about life's harsh injustices. Fantasy or not, reality is harsh, and her skill in dragon training was the only lucky break she got. Elsewhere, two trainers gossip about Lytia, calling her arrogant and questioning her abilities behind her back. Thompson smirks as the narration reveals the center's secret. They only train docile dragons to boost their reputation. As he disgustingly wonders if she seduced her way in, Lytia's resolve is strengthened by thoughts of the orphanage children. Finishing her work, a cheerful voice calls out, praising Trainer Lytia. Count fawns over Rue, joking that Lydia must have used a spell to make her so gentle. Lydia politely deflects the flattery from Count Olbart, as he continues to admire her work. She advises the Count to stay a few days to rebuild his bond with Rue, who seems unfamiliar with him. Count Olbart laments that he can't make more time for his beloved dragon. He expresses his deep gratitude for her dedicated care, which Lydia humbly accepts as part of her duty. In his mind, the Count imagines offering Lytia any reward she could possibly wish for. She graciously declines, stating her wish is to continue learning at the center, much to the Count's dismay. As the Count departs, he offers his future help while Rue gives him an affectionate goodbye nuzzle. Suddenly, Rue's head snaps up, her senses detecting something alarming in the distance. Wah! Rue lets out a powerful roar, startling Lytia and the Count as she calls out her name. Looking toward the main gate, Lydia wonders what could have possibly agitated her dragon. She tries to calm Rue, who is panting and trembling with anxiety. As Count Olbart asks what's wrong, Lytia admits she's only heard rumors of what could cause such a reaction. A legendary fiery red dragon is described, a rare beast of intense heat, chosen by only one family in history. Atop the majestic creature sits Duke Alberant, whose grand arrival is announced. Inside, the director nervously presents paperwork to the Duke's arriving party. Duke Alberant informs the nervous director that he has come to personally inspect the Empire's finest training facility. The director nervously confirms their reputation, and Duke Alberant says he wants to entrust them with training a dragon. The director's excitement deflates into shock when the Duke clarifies he doesn't mean the knight's dragons, but his own. The director stammers, asking if he means his Egric species dragon, and the Duke confirms this is precisely his intent. Looking out over the grounds, Duke Alberant reveals his true purpose, to find someone worthy of being his exclusive trainer. The director anxiously warns that a new trainer could cause the dragon to develop an aversion to all trainers. After worrying that no one is qualified, the director suddenly changes his tune, declaring his concerns unfounded. Duke Alberant coolly informs the director that the final decision on the matter will not be his to make. Surrounded by a fiery aura, the Duke reveals that the choice will ultimately be made by his dragon Kaizen. Later, the distraught young man finds Lydia, telling her she's been summoned by the director and leaving her to wonder why. Lydia asks him to wait, needing to finish her session with Count Olbart, who is affectionately petting Rue. Noticing her distraction, Count Olbart ends their training for the day and asks if something is wrong. Upon hearing that all trainers have been summoned, Count Olbart thoughtfully wonders if it's because of Duke Alberant's visit. Lydia breathes a sigh of relief as the Count graciously agrees to depart, accepting her summons. Lydia whispers a promise to give him Rue's treat recipe next time, and the Count accepts as Rue affectionately nuzzles him. Chomp. Thanking him for his understanding, Lydia and Rue wave goodbye to the departing Count. As Rue gives her a nudge, Lydia turns and asks where all the trainers are supposed to gather. A large crowd of trainers, including Lydia's peers, has already assembled at Training Ground 1. The director angrily chides Lydia for being late, but she calmly apologizes, explaining she was with Count Olbart. Her eyes widen in recognition as she sees Duke Alberant seated beside the director. A bad feeling washes over Lydia, just as her red-haired friend waves hello, and the director begins his announcement. The director announces they've been gathered to select a trainer for the Duke's dragon, causing the crowd to murmur about the infamous Agrix species. He clarifies the task is voluntary, but Lydia internally scoffs, thinking they must be out of their minds to even consider it. The narration explains the great risk. Agrix species dragons are exclusive to the Duke's family, meaning there is little information about them. The trainers understand the grim reality that provoking an unknown dragon means facing its wrath with a fragile human body. A key question hangs in the air. Why would the Duke trust them over his own family's dedicated trainers? Despite the danger, numerous hands shoot up as trainers eagerly volunteer for the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Lydia hesitates, realizing that if chosen, she would have to move to the distant duchy and leave the capital behind. The arrogant blonde man from the previous incident approaches Lydia with a sneer, asking if she's scared. He smugly declares that her hesitation proves she's just a girl, no matter how tough she acts. As Lydia seethes, her red-haired friend suddenly shoves the man, telling her to ignore the moron. Ugh. The blonde man angrily demands to know who she's calling a moron, but she coolly reminds him of his failure with the Rockwill dragon, asking who the real moron is. As the argument escalates, Lydia calmly steps in with a simple, "Hey." Her friend warns the blonde man to back down, pointing out that the director is watching them. Telling him to consider himself lucky, she lets the fuming blonde man retreat as the group watches him go. Her friend correctly guesses Lydia's hesitation is due to the orphanage, and Lydia quietly confirms her situation. However, her friend points out that the matron would likely be disappointed if Lydia passed up such a major opportunity. The director explains that lots will determine their turns, but Lydia reaffirms her preference for a quiet life over a roller coaster. The director gives his assurance that he will step in if things get dangerous, guaranteeing everyone's safety. Lydia recalls her first impression of the Duke, remembering he looks exactly like a male lead from a novel, a type to be avoided. While other girls swoon over the Duke, Lydia stands firm in her belief that getting involved with him means endless hardship. Wheeze! A sudden blast of fire erupts, sending the director and several other trainers flying. Whoa! Lydia stares in absolute shock, wondering what in the world just happened. The Duke's massive red dragon, Kaizen, is finally revealed, appearing even more menacing than she had imagined. Comforting her singed friend, Lydia grimly offers a moment of silence for whoever gets picked to train the difficult beast. TSK, the blonde man scoffs contemptuously at the other trainers, calling their reaction typical for a bunch of girls. He arrogantly declares that he'll show them how it's done as he confidently steps forward. The blonde man strides toward the massive red dragon while Lydia watches, completely unimpressed. He reaches out to the dragon, but the creature simply looks away, utterly uninterested in his attempt. Smirking, the blonde man declares it was simple, convinced that those who can't succeed simply never will. Lydia's red-haired friend furiously shouts at the blonde man, calling him a moron. The blonde man stares back, shocked by her outburst. Pow! the arrogant blonde man is suddenly thrown to the ground, crying out in pain amidst a fiery blast. Ugh. Grr. Kizan looms over the terrified trainer, who screams and begs for his life. Eek! Lydia calmly brings a whistle to her lips, apparently intervening to stop the dragon's attack. Kazan's massive yellow eye swivels, its attention now fixed on Lydia. On the ground, the blonde man desperately begs Lydia to do something, as the other trainers flee. Standing firm before the massive dragon, Lydia commands it to look her way. Lydia promises not to approach, observing that the intelligent dragon is only giving warnings, without truly attacking. As the blonde man whimpers on the ground, Lydia thinks that if he isn't fired after this, she's quitting. Lydia watches the dragon intently, deciding to wait for its breathing to calm before making her next move. Kwa. The dragon suddenly lunges, and Lydia, holding out a treat, worries she acted too soon. Her red-haired friend and the director watch in absolute horror from the sidelines. Duke Alberin observes the tense standoff with a cool, unreadable expression. Instead of attacking, Kazan gently bumps its head against Lydia's hand. Covered in slobber, a bewildered Lydia can only stammer, "Huh?" To everyone's shock, Kazan gently picks Lydia up in its mouth, looking utterly delighted. The director and Duke Alberant can only stare, completely dumbfounded by the turn of events. The Duke realizes Lydia is a rare kind of trainer who could read his dragon's behavior on their very first meeting. As the director stammers, the Duke cuts him off, stating they will finish their conversation later. The Duke walks away while his dragon, Kazan, proudly carries a stunned Lydia in its jaws. Lost in thought, the Duke walks through a flowery path, contemplating the unexpected development. Kneeling down, the Duke asks for her name, and a tearful Lydia introduces herself. The Duke commends her remarkable performance, leaving Lydia completely stunned by the praise. Lydia humbly claims she was just following procedure, but the Duke notes she was the only one to do so. With a slight smile, the Duke crosses his arms and prepares to ask her a question. He formally asks if she would consider training Kazan, but Lydia internally panics, thinking, absolutely not. Her thoughts race. She never wanted to become the Duke's personal trainer, not even for a second. In the director's office, Lydia apologizes, but firmly declines the role of the Duke's personal trainer. She explains that she never applied to work with an Agrix-type dragon and wouldn't have stepped up if not for the circumstances. Lydia clarifies that she only intervened because her fellow trainer made a critical mistake. Thinking of a smiling child, she resolves that she can't leave the orphanage that means everything to her. She wants to ease the director's load and ensure the children at the orphanage feel safe and unburdened. With her priorities clear, Lydia's expression is firm and resolute. She offers the Duke a final, sincere apology for her refusal. The Duke finds her rejection curious, considering the rarity of the dragon and the honor of serving him. A knock sounds at the door, and the Duke calmly invites the person to come in. The director enters, nervously trying to downplay Lydia's abilities despite the dragon's obvious attachment. The director continues to undermine Lydia, claiming she has no experience with dragons from noble families of the Empire. He argues that since she's only trained for less affluent families, giving her to the Duke is simply not an option. In his mind, the director reveals that Lydia is a vital asset for securing funding and maintaining the center's reputation. Wham! The Duke slams a folder on the table, pointedly telling the director that talent is useless if you don't know how to use it. The Duke corners the director, asking if he would prefer to train the dragon himself, which terrifies him. He reviews Lydia's file, noting her strong ties to the orphanage make relocation difficult and that she's already refused the offer. Having made his decision, the Duke stands and announces he is wrapping things up for the day. As he walks out, he smiles, confident that things will be fine now that he's found someone capable of handling his dragon. The director is left utterly confused, asking, "Huh?" as Lydia looks on. Lydia's mind struggles to process as she asks if the Duke just entrusted his Agrix species dragon to the center. The impossible reality sinks in, and she wonders aloud if the Duke is insane. Panicking, Lydia realizes she now has to add the Duke's murderous dragon to her already overwhelming schedule. The director desperately asks if she thinks anyone else can handle the Agrix species dragon, leaving Lydia speechless. Slam. Lyra insists her only duties will be feeding and managing the dragon, as there's no official request for training. Lydia furiously asks why she must take responsibility for Thompson's mistake, But the director yells that the Duke's decision is final. Seething, Lydia curses the useless Thompson, wishing she'd let the dragon finish him off in the first place. Lydia calmly presents her resignation letter, prompting the director to shout in panic that he won't allow it. "Nu woo!" The director clings to her leg, begging her to think of the other dragons, but Lydia is thoroughly annoyed. As the director weeps on the floor, Lydia realizes he's purposely exploiting her known weakness. A memory of her time with a gentle white dragon reminds her of the other dragons she cares for. Recalling the affectionate white dragon, Lydia's resolve weakens. The director beams with joy as Lydia reluctantly says okay, but she quickly adds a condition. Lydia sternly clarifies she will only feed, walk, and manage the dragon's scales, and absolutely nothing more. As the director thanks her profusely, she tells him to back off, stating she isn't doing it for him. A new sign is posted on the enclosure gate. Under special care, person in charge, Lydia. Bringing a cart of fresh food, Lydia peers into the dark enclosure and asks the dragon if it's been well. Lydia enters with the cart, feeling intimidated by the sight of the massive red dragon, Kazan. She tries to soothe the anxious beast, but it suddenly lunges at her with a furious roar. Roar! Telling it to wait, Lydia extends her hand, and the dragon pauses to sniff it. Sniff, roar. The dragon unleashes another deafening roar directly in her face. Lydia calmly holds up a finger, ordering the dragon to stop, and it surprisingly quiets down. Kazan lies down, looking at her with a confused expression. Whoa. Internally, Lydia melts, thinking the dragon is unbelievably cute and that she must be going crazy. Praising the now calm dragon, Lydia offers it the food, and Kazan happily digs in. Lydia notes the dragon's surprise, guessing this is the first time the spoiled creature has received such thoughtful treatment. Watching it eat, she feels a growing desire to train it, but forces herself to resist getting more involved. Once the dragon has finished its meal, Lydia asks if it's ready. She successfully puts a harness on the surprisingly docile dragon, announcing it's time for a walk. Lydia rides Kazan, who lets out a happy roar. Roar. The dragon suddenly throws a tantrum, expressing its extreme annoyance. Clenching her fists, Lydia resolves to endure, reminding herself that meddling further will only tie her down. As the dragon continues to roar, Lydia reinforces her boundaries. Feed, walk, manage scales, and nothing more. Screech, shriek, kayo. She tightens her grip on the reins, locked in a struggle. Lydia stands her ground in a tense face-off with Kazan, firmly telling it, no. From a distance, Duke Alberant watches the scene with a thoughtful, unreadable expression. The Duke approaches, commending Lydia for taking good care of his dragon. Growl Kazan affectionately nuzzles its master, and the Duke calms it down. The Duke smiles warmly while gently petting his happy dragon. Watching them, Lydia is surprised to see the Duke can make such a gentle expression. Ahem. Lydia explains she only provided basic management, and the Duke acknowledges it wasn't bad. The Duke mentions the rarity of her opportunity, but Lydia silently reaffirms she still won't take the job. As the Duke leaves, he reflects on his surprise that Kazan bonded with a female trainer. He muses on how few female trainers handle large dragons, and Lydia feels his unsettling gaze. Lydia internally scoffs, vowing not to become his trainer no matter how much he stares. The Duke calls her name, startling her into a hesitant response. He gives her a subtle warning, stating that he can reverse his decision to leave the dragon at the center anytime. Lydia understands and bows as he entrusts Kazan to her care until his return. Confused by his parting words, Lydia wonders what the Duke meant about testing her stubbornness. Worried she's triggered a novel-style plotline, she reveals she has already sent out inquiries to other training centers. Staring at the center, she desperately hopes for a swift reply from anyone who can take her away. The scene shifts, indicating the passage of time as Lydia waits. Lydia despairs, as her teammates abandoned her, leaving her to handle all the animals by herself. Wow, it's a total solo mission. With the final touch, Lydia finishes her task, announcing that it's done. A man in a pink suit, Count Olbarth, praises her magical skill with the white dragon as she humbly deflects the compliment. Count Olbarth reveals that today is his last day, as he is finally returning to his homeland. He looks at Lydia, remarking that it feels like a waste to leave someone with her talent behind. The Count continues his praise, noting she earned her dragon trainer license at the youngest age and with the highest score. A narration explains that among nobles, dragons are key to succession battles, and trainers who shape them wield immense wealth and influence. Lydia internally grumbles that thanks to the director, she's constantly being rotated and is now stuck with Count Harris again. Kya tilde. As the white dragon nuzzles her, she reflects that the center is a rare place to handle such a variety of dragons. Count Olbarth observes that she doesn't seem very ambitious. He gives her a small package, advising that a little ambition can be a good thing. Lydia stands alone, pondering the Count's cryptic advice that no fish can survive in water that's too clean. Watching the Count's dragon fly away, she affirms that she loves dragons enough that simply watching them satisfies her. She thinks about how the training center lets her see all the dragons she wants, then gasps as she looks at the Count's gift. Unwrapping the cloth, she discovers a massive, brilliant red gemstone, wondering what more she could possibly ask for. As Duke Alberant appears behind her, she considers that selling the gem could fund a priest for the orphanage. Eek! Startled, Lydia turns as the Duke asks if she knows them. Flustered, she recognizes Duke Alberant and stammers out his title. To her shock, the director appears behind the Duke with a knowing smile. Director. Lydia wonders why the director is with the Duke, as the director calmly asks if she has been well. The Duke says he's going to check on Kazan and tells them to talk things over, leaving Lydia in a state of confusion. The director gently takes Lydia's hand, asking if she has a moment to speak privately. They sit down for tea in a quiet room, a nervous tension in the air. Lydia breaks the silence, cautiously asking the director if something is wrong. The director inquires about her health and her siblings before getting to the point. She bluntly asks Lydia for her opinion on Duke Alberant's Agrix, leaving Lydia completely surprised. After a moment of hesitation, Lydia stammers that the dragon is incredibly impressive. Lydia describes the dragon's scales, which seem to shimmer with a perpetual red glow. A close-up shows the intense, powerful eye of the red dragon, Kazan. She continues her detailed analysis, noting the fine ridges on its scales and theorizing its shimmer is magical. Lydia excitedly gushes that the dragon is like a living volcano and one of the most beautiful and intelligent she's ever seen. Realizing she got carried away, Lydia panics while the director laughs warmly at her passion. The director calls her name, and Lydia snaps back to attention. The director calmly states her request. She wants Lydia to be the one to train Duke Alberant's dragon. Stunned, Lydia can only say, "Wait, what?" As the director explains that rumors of her talent have already spread, the director reveals that the Duke visited the orphanage, donated a massive sum, and brought a priest who healed the sick children. Lydia stares at a painting, quietly absorbing the weight of this news. When Lydia asks about the director, a flashback shows her injured, but she smiles, saying she received help too. Tears of joy well up in Lydia's eyes as she expresses her immense relief. The director reassures her, urging her not to worry about the orphanage and to seize the opportunity the Duke has offered. Holding Lydia's calloused hands, the director speaks of her sincerity and hard work. The director states with pride that her hands are undeniable proof of her immense effort. Embracing Lydia, the director says she knows Lydia has been holding herself back for their sake. She tenderly calls Lydia her proud daughter, and Lydia weeps in her arms, finally letting her guard down. The scene shifts to Duke Alberant, who is peacefully relaxing in a field of flowers, using a sleeping Kazan as a pillow. As Lydia approaches with a newly resolute expression, the Duke asks if she enjoyed her chat. Lydia curtly thanks him for his consideration, but he repeats her words with a hint of skepticism. She stands before him and formally states that she has thought about the offer he made. Lydia is visibly tense and frustrated by the situation. She internally fumes, annoyed that he's playing dumb after going to such lengths with the orphanage. Lydia feigns disappointment that he's forgotten the offer and asks if it's withdrawn, but he scoffs at her attempt. Duke Alberant towers over her, noting that she can't even take a joke. He tells her that since she's changed her mind, it's a welcome turn of events for them. As he asks to go over the details, Lydia looks up with a determined smirk. In a flashback, the tearful orphanage children beg their sister Lydia to promise she will visit. Lydia reassures a crying child, promising she will, and the child tearfully agrees. Hick. Promise. A narration explains that after Lydia signed the contract with the Duke, time passed quickly. The director embraces Lydia, telling her to prioritize her own well-being and that she will always be rooting for her. Touched, Lydia closes her eyes and accepts the director's comforting hug. Lydia confirms with the director that she's really leaving, and someone calls out for a woman named Melissa. A red-haired woman named Melissa tells Lydia it's a shame they're parting ways, but that it all worked out for the best. Lydia thanks her colleagues for seeing her off and offers them a bit of news as a farewell gift. Leaning in conspiratorially, Melissa whispers that Duke Alberant filed a complaint and had Thompson dismissed. Melissa celebrates the news by popping open a bottle of sparkling wine. Her friends, the children, and the director all wave goodbye, wishing her the best on her new journey. Waving back with a hopeful smile, Lydia begins her departure from the center. She reflects on her mixed feelings about leaving when Duke Alberant suddenly appears, telling her she's late. Eek! Lydia apologizes for the delay, but the Duke remarks that it looked like a permanent farewell, reminding her of the generous vacation days in her contract. Annoyed that he came to pick her up, Lydia internally admits that the contract's good pay and benefits were too hard to pass up. The contract's top priority is revealed, helping Kaizen get along with the other dragons in the Duke's order, confirming Lydia's suspicion of a socialization issue. As she reads the contract, Lydia notes there was never any tension between Kaizen and the Duke. In fact, their bond was ideal, as the Duke always made time for his dragon. Lydia points to a specific clause in the contract and asks about it. An incentive will be provided if she determines additional training is necessary. The Duke confirms its meaning, questioning who would know a dragon's needs better than its trainer. He promises fair compensation if she finds anything he's missed, but Lydia suspects the clause is a setup. The Duke continues, stating that if such a matter were to arise, he'd absolutely approve it, and Lydia decides to trust their agreement to make adjustments later. Lydia gives herself a pep talk, resolving to do well now that the contract is signed. Looking up at the bright sky, Lydia steels her resolve for the new challenge ahead. Riding a majestic white mount, she gasps in awe. Whoa. She marvels at the vast and beautiful landscape of the duchy. Lydia gushes that the land is perfect for raising dragons, but a hooded retainer with the Duke tells her to calm down. She explains her excitement, but the man cryptically warns her that things aren't as great as they seem, though it might not be a problem for her. Lydia looks puzzled, as the man tells her she will understand when she sees for herself. A wave of unease washes over Lydia as she faces the grim-faced retainers. She imagines the other trainers' resentment, understanding why they would be upset that a newcomer tamed their difficult dragon. She recalls hearing rumors that the eastern region was in chaos just a few years ago. Realizing she knows very little about the situation, Lydia braces herself, knowing things won't be easy. The gates to the Duchy of Alberant swing open, revealing her new home. Lydia gets excited, imagining all the new dragons and trainers she will meet at such a grand estate. Standing with Kaizen, she looks around expectantly, but is met with an empty field. She's shocked to see not a single other dragon, and the retainer confirms her disbelief. Seriously? The man explains that other dragons can't be kept there while Kaizen is running wild, and the dragon growls in annoyance. The retainer abruptly leaves her with the dragons and a panicked trainer, and Lydia desperately tries to stop them as Kaizen lunges. Stunned by the trainer's cowardice, Lydia wonders if he's even certified. Sigh. She resolves to head inside, admitting that if dragons were easy, trainers wouldn't be necessary. Lydia leads a hesitant Kaizen forward. She internally concedes that Kaizen is, in fact, ridiculously temperamental. However, she senses the dragon's difficult behavior isn't intentional. Lydia gently pats the dragon's snout, reassuring Kaizen that she isn't angry at it. Lydia reassures a reluctant Kaizen, telling him to wait inside while she handles things. Kaizen whimpers softly as Lydia acknowledges that his behavior isn't his fault. As she walks into the duchy's main hall, a startled butler and maid watch her pass, hinting at the usual commotion. In a fiery flashback, an enraged man resembling the retainer shouts Duke Alberant's name, declaring the owner must take responsibility. In a grand, sunlit office, a voice welcomes Duke Alberant back. The Duke, now identified as Ulysses Alberant, asks for a report, and his secretary informs him that many trainers have resigned. Baskel, Alberant's personal secretary, explains that covering the gaps left after the Duke's succession has been a struggle. Ulysses listens wearily, as Pascal states that the biggest problem is finding a suitable trainer. A flashback reveals a young Ulysses Alberant who lost his parents early on, and an opportunistic uncle who moved in to seize the family's power in dragons. The narration explains the importance of dedicated trainers for wealthy houses that raise dragons. For rare dragons like Kaizen, a trainer's status was paramount, holding all the secrets to handling them. Eulis recalls the massacre that followed. His uncle, fearing betrayal, had killed all the key trainers, leaving the duchy without their expertise. Back in the present, Pascal asks Eulis if he has found a new trainer yet. With a sly smile, Eulis replies that he's found someone quite interesting, piquing Pascal's curiosity. Huh? Pascal leans forward, inquisitively asking what kind of person this new trainer is. Eulis reveals it's a trainer Kaizen actually likes, leaving Pascal utterly perplexed. Pascal is flabbergasted, recalling that the notoriously reclusive Kaizen will only appear for someone who meets his impossible standards, something even he rarely witnesses. As Lydia strides purposefully through the hall, Eulis tells a disbelieving Pascal that he'll see for himself soon enough. Pascal cries out in shock as Lydia bursts into the office, but Eulis remains perfectly calm. Surrounded by a fiery aura of determination, Lydia grins and announces, "So this is where you were." Pascal questions her presence, reminding her of her duties with Kaizen, and internally notes that the new trainer is a woman. Wham! Lydia slams her hands on the desk, declaring she's here to see him precisely because of her new role. Lydia asks if Kaizen has always been solitary, and Eulis confirms that the dragon has kept to himself since childhood. My goodness. Lydia slumps onto the desk in dismay, and Eulis asks her what's wrong. Lydia straightens up and clarifies her training goals, socializing Kaizen and getting him to accept food from others, which Eulis confirms. She boldly declares that their first step must be to move Kaizen to a new location. Lydia argues that while Kaizen was separated for his comfort, isolating him is why they must now relocate him. She explains that his isolation has made him temperamental because he simply doesn't know how to interact with other dragons. Eulis asks if she is confident in her plan, and she firmly replies that she is. Eulis accepts her proposal but warns her that she alone will bear the consequences of her training methods. Lydia agrees but states that she needs to conduct some preparatory training first. She plans to use the time it takes to relocate the enclosure to conduct basic obedience training with Kaizen. Eulis suggests 1 week should be enough, shocking Lydia as Pascal panics, realizing she's being locked in. Eulis reminds her that it was her own idea to conduct training during the relocation period. He stands and coolly warns her not to fail her very first task as his trainer. Lydia smirks, relishing the Duke's surprise at her directness and vowing to deliver results that will please him. Her bravado fades as a desperate thought flashes through her mind. I can't do this, no way. Days later, Lycia sits dejectedly under a tree, realizing that the other retainers are actively avoiding her. She notes with frustration that people flinch and flee the moment they see her. She sighs, realizing she's been too busy with Kaizen to even attempt a conversation with anyone. Thump. As if sensing her frustration, Kaizen's tail gently nudges a bucket of water toward her. The day arrives to demonstrate the results of her obedience training to the Duke. Grr, Lydia nervously mounts a surprisingly affectionate Kaizen, ready to begin the public demonstration. As they soar into the sky, she steels her resolve to keep her promise and show the Duke her progress. On the ground below, Eulis waits patiently while other retainers struggle to control their panicking mounts. Eulis watches with a focused gaze as Lydia and Kaizen descend from the sky. They land gracefully before him and he greets them, but Kaizen immediately lets out a low, warning growl. Growl! Kaizen's growl deepens, his eyes fixed on the Duke and the other mounts. The nearby mounts rear in terror, forcing the handlers to shout for them to calm down. Lydia turns to her dragon and calmly but firmly commands, Kaizen, stand down. Lydia calmly repeats her command, ordering the dragon to move further back. Kaizen reluctantly takes a few steps back, wings flared, but still lets out a low grumble. As the other handlers watch nervously, Lydia gives the final command, down. To the handler's astonishment, Kaizen actually obeys and lies down submissively. Eulis watches, stunned that someone other than himself is capable of controlling the powerful dragon. Lydia crosses her arms, satisfied that she's kept her promise to demonstrate perfect obedience. But a flicker of doubt crosses her mind. Though she trained him to obey, something feels incomplete. The Duke continues to watch with an unreadable, intense gaze. Now on one knee before them, Eulis asks, for now? And Lydia confirms his obedience is only temporary. She explains there's no such thing as perfect control, and Kazan gives a happy yip of agreement. Lydia firmly reminds Euless that a dragon is a living creature, not a tool, and can be unpredictable. Euless stands and formally addresses her as trainer Lydia, and she respectfully answers him. In a surprising move, the Duke entrusts the education of the house's apprentice trainers to her. Lydia's mind goes blank with shock as she processes his words. "Pardon?" She stammers, asking why she's being given this responsibility when there are other trainers available. Euless reveals a shocking truth. Those aren't official trainers, but apprentices, as all the certified trainers have quit. The horrifying realization dawns on Lydia. The duchy's dragons have been managed by uncertified trainees all this time. Fuming, Lydia grabs the Duke, demanding to know why he withheld such a crucial piece of information. She accuses him of recklessness, but he coolly dismisses her concerns, further fueling her rage at his nonchalance. Is that so? Euless smirks, reminding her that she would have been held responsible for any failure. Infuriating Lydia, she clenches her fists, unable to comprehend how a prestigious house could have not a single official trainer. Lydia furiously argues that for the House of Alberant, this is like losing their own family tree, a fundamental failure. Leaning in the doorway, Euless calmly concedes that her assessment isn't entirely wrong. Flustered in a storage room, Lydia looks up at the Duke who has followed her. Euless explains he came to commend her for the successful training session. He coolly observes her agitated state and adds that a commendation no longer seems necessary. He brings up her contract, and she warily confirms that she remembers the terms. She recalls the clause about a bonus for necessary additional training. Suddenly understanding his angle, Euless corners her, asking for her professional opinion on whether relying solely on apprentices is wise for Kazan's training. He cleverly suggests that educating those apprentices is therefore a necessary prerequisite, leaving Lydia speechless. He dismisses her protests, stating she will be compensated for the extra work since she already has Kazan's loyalty. Euless maintains his composed, unbothered expression, having successfully cornered her. Lydia pushes back, asking if he's disappointed that Kazan actually listens to his trainer, causing him to flinch. She smirks, internally celebrating that she was right. He is definitely disappointed she succeeded. Regaining his composure, Euless accepts that educating the apprentices is now part of her contractual duties. Lydia brings up another issue, noting that a house of Alberant's stature should have secret training techniques. Euless turns the question back on her, asking what she, as a trainer, knows about his house and its history. Lydia admits her knowledge is limited to common rumors, as her work rarely involved the aristocracy's private affairs. Euless begins to explain the duchy's dark history, starting with the 100 years it went without an agric species dragon. He reveals that during that century, the family was led by those who weren't proper heirs, over a grim, blood-stained scene. Without a legitimate successor, infighting was rampant, as relatives coveted the title of Duke. He recounts the story of his greedy uncle, whose motto was, "If I can't have it, no one can," and asks Lycia to guess what he did to the official trainers. Understanding the grim history, Lydia proposes a new, long-term approach, starting with studying Kazan. She revises her plan. She'll postpone moving the enclosure to instead focus on coordinating with the apprentices and socializing Kazan with other dragons. Euless calmly agrees to her revised plan, allowing her to proceed as she sees fit. He admits his surprise, confessing he fully expected her to demand to terminate the contract after learning the truth. He muses that he imagined she'd quit rather than risk her career on a crumbling house. Lydia stands silently, feeling the immense weight of his expectations and the precarious situation. As she faces the apprentices with Pascal, she can tangibly feel their collective animosity. Lydia takes a deep breath as Pascal prepares to introduce her to the apprentices. Activating her social smile, Lydia cheerfully introduces herself as the new exclusive trainer and asks for their cooperation. The apprentices stare back with open hostility and suspicion, as one mutters, "Ugh," as expected. Pascal addresses the tense crowd, acknowledging their complaints but asking them to keep one crucial fact in mind. He declares that trainer Lydia was personally chosen by the Duke, leaving the apprentices utterly stunned. A cold, crackling silence falls over the apprentices as they process the shocking news. Pascal cheerily invites Lydia to speak, but she internally panics, wondering how she's supposed to address such a hostile crowd. She sizes up the room, sensing a mix of surprise from the newcomers and deep-seated wariness from those who know her. Lydia formally announces that, on the Duke's orders, she will be their instructor from now on. She humbly admits she knows nothing of their specific ways, and that they are the true experts on the aberrant dragons. Lydia proposes a trade, her official training knowledge, in exchange for their experience with the duchy's dragons and the egric species. An apprentice raises his hand, and Lydia gives him the floor to speak. The skeptical apprentice challenges her, asking what happens when a mere probationer angers a dangerous agric species dragon. Another chimes in, recalling a near-death experience and questioning how they're supposed to help when they're so outmatched. Smirking, Lydia agrees that the dragons are dangerous, arguing this is precisely why they must share information, to prevent being killed by the creatures they care for. A female apprentice points out their disadvantage, reminding Lydia that they are still unlicensed probationers. Lydia turns to them, appealing to their shared love for dragons as her foundation for working together. She clarifies her goal is not to command them, but to become colleagues who jointly care for the duchy's dragons. Her heartfelt appeal to their shared passion for dragons seems to finally get through, softening their expressions. Lydia bows deeply before the apprentices, making a final respectful plea for their cooperation. Euless suddenly appears on a nearby path, asking if she is finished with her speech. He watches her with a slight smile, letting out an amused ha. His amusement grows into a full laugh as he observes the scene. Euless calls her smart, but adds a chilling threat. Had she failed, she'd have met the same fate as the previous trainers. He strolls away, promising fair compensation to minimize complaints from the apprentices. Looking back with a confident smile, Euless challenges them to prove their worth. He adds a final deadly condition if they want to live, causing Lydia to collapse in furious frustration. Lydia fumes over the Duke's threats, but realizes the fastest way to learn is by managing the dragons directly. She and an apprentice peek into the stables, preparing for the next step. The apprentice is horrified, asking if he's truly expected to feed the growling, roaring dragons in the terrifying hall alone. He smugly calls it a basic task, infuriating Lydia, who realizes he's deliberately underestimating and testing her. Lydia knows that refusing this task will give her new apprentice an excuse to challenge her authority. She glares, seeing the mountain of food as another of the Duke's cruel tests, and curses him under her breath. Feigning delight, Lydia asks if simply feeding the dragons will be enough to prove herself. The apprentice stammers, caught off guard as Lydia eagerly volunteers to take full responsibility for all feeding duties. With a brilliant smile, Lydia dismisses the apprentice, insisting his help would only be a hindrance. As the apprentice leaves, he realizes he's been outmaneuvered by Lydia's surprising tactic. The apprentice runs off, muttering that he's not the first to try and intimidate her with such tactics. Lydia recalls the villains from her old training center, vowing to make these apprentices regret giving her feeding duty as a hungry dragon watches. She greets a white dragon, promising to prepare its food, and it lets out a low growl. Upon closer inspection, Lydia is shocked by the poor condition of the dragon's scales. She diagnoses the dragon as severely undernourished, while it eagerly chomps down on a bucket of fruit. Lydia comforts the frantically eating dragon, realizing it's just starving, though it still lets out a possessive growl. Seeing the peacefully eating dragon, Lydia descends into a fit of maniacal laughter, realizing they tried to break her by making her manage neglected animals. She laughs demonically, vowing to beat the basic principles of a trainer into their heads. Watching from a distance, the ponytailed apprentice nervously asks if Lydia's behavior is okay. The skeptical apprentice worries, knowing that handling 30 portions is impossible, and that they were always told to at least feed the dragons. He rages against the absurdity of a single trainer from the capital trying to teach them after they've cared for the dragons for years. He scoffs, dismissing her earlier speech about loving dragons as a complete joke. He watches her with the dragon, convinced she'll bail as soon as the work becomes too difficult. Gra, an apprentice, panics as a green dragon suddenly becomes hostile inside its cage. A man named Mr. Bruce frantically asks the skeptical apprentice for help, but he doesn't know what to do, lamenting that the dragons were calm just days ago. The skeptical apprentice wonders what's going on as Lydia appears behind him with a grim expression. Holding a shovel, Lydia coldly asks if it isn't time for their training to begin. Lydia dismisses the commotion, claiming it's nothing important. The skeptical apprentice watches suspiciously as Lydia excuses herself to go prepare the feed. As soon as Lydia leaves, Chaos erupts as the once calm dragons turn wild and attack the handlers. The skeptical apprentice watches the mayhem, realizing the dragons went berserk the moment she walked in. He desperately calls out to Lydia, but she coldly brushes him off, saying she's busy. With a radiant but insincere smile, Lydia reminds him she's too busy managing 30 dragons to help. She passive-aggressively asks why he's bothering her when he has more experience, leaving the two apprentices stunned. Defeated, the skeptical apprentice hangs his head and offers a sincere apology. Lydia feigns ignorance but says she's learning a lot thanks to them, internally scoffing at his newfound respect. The skeptical apprentice and Pascal eagerly offer their assistance to help with the feeding. She furiously tells them to fix their own mistakes and that she doesn't care if they get trampled in the process. Pushing a cart of fruit, Lydia internally scoffs that they're now desperate and crawling back to her. She seethes, convinced they deserve this outcome for trying to trip her up with feeding duty. She reflects that the apprentices were likely just hazing her as their seniors did, but they're unaware of a critical detail. Lydia reveals their secret. Apprentices are only given half of a dragon's normal ration to feed them. She explains the remaining food is given during training, a method to enforce obedience from the hungry dragon. An exhausted apprentice collapses, muttering that anyone who enters a dragon's den without instructions has it coming. As a huge red dragon purrs in its sleep, it stirs slightly, sensing a presence. Lydia lies down beside the behemoth, telling Kaizen that she's going to take a little break. As Kaizen purrs contentedly, she tells him not to disturb her during her golden break time. She snuggles up against the dragon's side, asking him to stay put for the next hour. Lydia's eyes flash open as she has a sudden, powerful realization. Overwhelmed by a blissful warmth radiating from Kaizen, she feels her stress melt away, declaring it heaven. Euless appears nearby, questioning the name Kaizen. He's momentarily confused to see the massive red dragon peeking out of the enclosure. Kaizen lets out a low hiss, as if asking Euless if he's okay. Euless looks past the dragon to find Lydia sleeping peacefully, nestled against its side. Euless looks down at the sleeping trainer, quietly questioning her presence. He kneels down beside Lydia, observing her peaceful rest against his dragon. Observing the scene, Euless notes that the apprentices don't seem to be following her instructions. He reports to a blonde-haired aide that Lydia is managing all 30 dragons herself and questions why he wasn't informed. The aide speculates that Lydia considers it an internal training matter and wants to handle it personally. The aide suggests that, due to her extreme workload, Lydia should be given the authority to discipline the apprentices. Euless thoughtfully considers his aide's recommendation. Kaizen lets out a protective growl as Euless wonders if he should wake the sleeping trainer. He stands and turns to leave, promising to intervene later if needed. He privately muses that it would be a problem for him if his dragon's trainer collapsed from overwork. A frantic voice shouting her name jolts Lydia awake with a start. She sits up next to a purring Kaizen and apologizes, admitting she dozed off. As the shouting continues, an annoyed Lydia wonders what the commotion is while Kaizen growls in irritation. She warns the approaching apprentice to lower his voice, reminding him he's in the Agrix enclosure. A panicked, pink-haired apprentice rushes up, relieved to finally find her. He stammers that something terrible has happened, and Lydia feels a familiar, sinking dread. He cries out in terror that the drakes have escaped. All of them, as the broken gate stands open behind them. The panicked apprentice stammers that he went to secure the drakes, but they slipped past him and escaped. A cute mascot thanks the reader for their support. Lydia smirks, sarcastically asking if they expect her to clean up their mess now. The panicked apprentice explains that the leader ran off with the other dracosteeds, and now none of the remaining dragons will listen to him. Internally screaming for them to handle their own mess, Lydia barely contains her urge to say it aloud. A powerful dracosteed is shown as a warning declares they must be brought under control before something terrible happens. GRK Lydia summons Kaizen, who roars in response, ready for action. Seeing the open gate, a determined Lydia vows to find the escaped dracosteeds and bring them all back. A lore panel explains that dracosteeds are scaly, horned dragons that resemble horses in form. Riding atop Kaizen, Lydia considers where the escaped dracosteeds might have gone. Sniff. Lydia urges Kaizen to fly higher, and the dragon sniffs the air to track the herd. From high in the sky, Lydia suddenly spots something in the distance. Found them, she cries, spotting the herd in an open field, just as she predicted their horse-like habits would lead them. Lydia points out the blue dracosteed as the leader. amused by how excited the herd seems. Lydia blows a sharp whistle, immediately catching the attention of the Dracosteed leader. Kiek, Kazan lands with a powerful thud, making his presence known to the herd. Facing the herd, Lydia confidently asks if they enjoyed their little outing. The leader growls defiantly, but Lydia calmly informs the herd that it's time to go back. Smirking at their defiance, Lydia acknowledges they won't go back easily and notes this would be impossible alone. "But I didn't come alone," she says smugly, as Kazan looms menacingly behind her, reinforcing her order to return. As the apprentices watch in disbelief from the stables, Lydia successfully herds the Dracosteeds back through the gate. Overwhelmed with shock, the skeptical apprentice doesn't know what to do or say. The apprentices argue amongst themselves, admitting they're helpless as they can't even approach the Dracosteeds on horseback, let alone lead them back. He reminds them of the Duke's inevitable wrath, asking if anyone has a plan to avoid punishment for this failure. The skeptical apprentice kicks Mr. Bruce, ordering him to go search, as the pink-haired apprentice shouts in alarm. A stunned apprentice with glasses gapes in disbelief, stammering as he exclaims, "The Dracosteeds!" The entire herd of Dracosteeds is seen returning, calmly and in formation. Leading the herd from atop the blue leader, Lydia commands the apprentices to open the training ground gate. Thump! The massive wooden gates to the training ground swing open. A stunned apprentice watches in amazement as the Dracosteeds calmly file past him into the training grounds. Riding at the head of the herd, Lydia passes the stunned apprentices, one of whom can only stammer, "How?" The skeptical apprentice calls out to trainer Lydia, then turns to furiously berate the other apprentices for their inaction. The apprentices publicly confront Lydia, questioning how a trainer could let an entire herd escape in the first place. Facing their accusations, Lydia coldly asks if they have anything else to say. Mr. Bruce steps forward, flanked by the other senior apprentices, ready to speak for the group. To her surprise, Mr. Bruce kneels before her, declaring that he is truly ashamed. Lydia asks if they now acknowledge the flaws in their methods, and the apprentices solemnly agree. Then Lydia begins, looking down at the kneeling apprentice, about to state her terms. He looks up, wondering if she will finally ask them to stop their pointless power struggles and cooperate. He watches her with hopeful anticipation, awaiting her decision. He asks if she's going to expel them, but Lydia coolly replies that she has no such authority. With a gentle smile, she explains that all she requires from them is mutual respect, sealing their new pact with a handshake. A grateful Mr. Bruce thanks trainer Lydia profusely. As he promises they will follow her guidance, Lydia internally sighs, wishing it hadn't taken a crisis to get here. Euless appears, coolly asking for an update, and Lydia gives him a tired but victorious smirk. Seeing Lydia now standing united with the once rebellious apprentices, Euless demands to know what happened. Lydia calmly reports that a minor disturbance has been handled, but Euless's sharp gaze shows he's not buying it. While Lydia looks on calmly, Mr. Bruce internally marvels that she single-handedly resolved the mass escape of the Duke's personal Dracosteeds. Arms crossed, Euless glares at her and icily repeats, "And you call that a minor disturbance?" Euless sarcastically asks if the escape of the Duke's entire team of Dracosteeds qualifies as a minor mishap, noting it's not a clean record for her. Lydia explains that not only did the Drakes return, but a few wild ones joined them, highlighting the ducal Drake's impressive capability. She looks at Euless hopefully, asking him to overlook the incident just this once. He questions why he should overlook the apprentice's serious mistake, but Lydia argues that it all turned out well in the end. Mr. Bruce nervously adds that it would be a problem if the trainers left, as only they can feed the Drakes, let alone train them. Lydia passionately argues that the apprentices understand the Duke's dragons best, and Euless listens in silence. Euless announces that because Lydia resolved the issue, he will refrain from punishing the apprentices by the book, but there will be consequences. He sentences them to a 1-year salary deduction and threatens dismissal if they don't prove their competence, which the apprentices gratefully accept. Mr. Bruce grimly reflects that no matter their value, the powerful ducal house could easily replace them all. Lydia watches on, looking relieved by the outcome. The scene shifts to a quiet view of the estate at night. Euless finds Lydia sleeping soundly on Kazan again and wonders why she's back in the enclosure. Kazan lets out a joyful, wide-mouthed roar, clearly happy to have her there. Grrrk. Doubting the dragon's simple happiness, Yulis approaches as Kazan lets out a protective growl. Yuli gently lifts the sleeping Lytia, telling Kazan that while this spot is comfortable for a dragon, it's not for his trainer. Cradling her, he tells the dragon he wouldn't want his trainer to get sick from sleeping on the ground. Groan. A pouty Kazan watches them, clearly annoyed that his cuddle buddy is being taken away. Grown Kazan follows obediently, as Yulis carries Lytia off with a slight smirk, the dragon's tail trailing behind them. As he carries her down a grand hall, Yulis muses that he now understands Lytia's reliable nature, which was his true goal. His thoughts continue, acknowledging that being talented and being trustworthy are two different matters entirely. Yulis instructs a butler to prepare a proper room for trainer Lytia and to summon a cleric for her. He declares her the duchy's only exclusive trainer and orders everyone to treat her with the utmost care. He reflects on her remarkable skill, recalling how she recovered the wyverns, tamed wild ones, and flew Kazan with ease. Yulis internally concludes that she is a responsible and valuable talent who has proven she's more than just her certificate. He carries her through the opulent hall, her well-being now his priority. Lytia murmurs in her sleep, unconsciously snuggling closer into his arms. Yulis's eyes widen in surprise at her sudden movement. Looking down at her, he remarks that the day's events must have left quite an impression on her. A new day dawns, light streaming through an ornate window. Gasp! Lydia jolts awake, sitting up suddenly in an unfamiliar, luxurious bed. Disoriented, she clutches the blanket and theatrically asks, "Where am I?" "Who am I?" She immediately grins, pleased that she finally got to use the cliché line for waking up in a strange place. Her amusement fades as she genuinely wonders where she is, recalling she was last resting on Kazan before a knock sounds at the door. A butler enters with a cart of food, explaining that the Duke ordered her to rest, leaving Lytia flustered as she realizes the maids changed her clothes. She is shocked to learn a priest visited, and that she has been asleep for an entire day due to extreme fatigue. Panicked about Kazan, she asks for her clothes, but the nervous steward assures her there's no need to worry. The steward flinches as Lydia prepares to get out of bed, looking toward the door. The door opens to reveal Yulis, now dressed in a casual white shirt. He invites her to dine with him, leaving Lydia flustered and suspicious about his sudden kindness. The two sit down to a lavish meal at a large, formal dining table. Lydia internally laments that her plan to refuse failed, but admits to herself that the food is actually delicious. Yulis breaks the silence, questioning if it's truly safe for her to sleep inside Kazan's enclosure. Lydia sheepishly admits Kazan's scales were irresistibly warm, mentally dubbing him the ultimate heated blanket, while realizing she's been caught. He says he doesn't blame her, but would appreciate it if she refrained in the future, much to her surprise. Lytia slyly asks if he's done it before himself, and his flustered silence is all the answer she needs. Smirking, Lydia suggests they take the opportunity to speak frankly, now that she's proven her capabilities. Yulis confesses that Kazan's socialization was just a pretext to find a permanent, reliable trainer for the ducal house. He asks for her professional opinion on whether an Agrix-class dragon truly needs a herd structure, leaving her pensive. Acknowledging her hesitation, Yulis compromises on the herd but insists socialization training is still necessary, prompting Lydia to ask why. He gravely explains that since Kazan lives in the human world, if he ever hurts someone, there will be only one grim solution, regardless of his rarity. Lydia asks what the grim solution is, then coldly delivers a single, shocking word: euthanasia. Yulis stares in disbelief as Lytia asks if he really wants things to come to that. Smirking slightly, Yulis answers that he wouldn't want that, would he? Yulis angrily rejects the idea, but Lytia challenges him, asking what the imperial family would do. She poses a grim scenario. What if an unsocialized Kazan, a living volcano, causes chaos in his absence? Lydia presses further, asking if he truly thinks they would simply overlook such a destructive incident. She acknowledges her words are harsh, but reminds him that human society wasn't built for dragons, making the issue bigger than just Kazan. Lytia cleverly praises Yulis, stating that the only reason no incidents have occurred is because he truly cherishes and cares for Kazan. Understanding his hesitation, she softens her tone and simply asks him to consider her proposal. Now that she's officially his dedicated trainer, Lydia vows to do her absolute best for both Kazan and Yulis. Having sealed the deal, a cheerful Lydia asks how long her mandated rest period will be. Yulis grants her a full week's leave, instructing her to stay at the estate and recover, much to her surprise. He casually reassures her not to worry about Kazan, as he handled those duties just fine before she arrived. Lytia sighs in resignation, as Euless reminds her to prioritize her own well-being as the duchy's only dedicated trainer. Alone again, Lytia sits at the table and wonders if she spoke too harshly to him. She reflects that while he clearly cares for Kazan, they always seem to miss each other's point, but decides to enjoy the moment for now. Brushing off her concerns, Lytia decides to enjoy her sweet vacation and happily requests another steak. The scene transitions to the Grand Ducal estate on the third day of Lytia's vacation. While walking with a stack of books, Lytia is surprised to see Euless, who appears pale and surrounded by a dark aura. Noticing he looks unwell, she stammers that a week seems too long to rest. HRK. Euless cuts her off, insisting that when a person rests, they must do so properly. He walks past her, stating he won't entrust work to someone who hasn't rested well. She watches him leave, deeply concerned that something is wrong and wondering if an accident occurred. Deciding he would have told her if it were serious, she resolves to work hard once her week-long vacation ends. 2 days later, her peaceful vacation is interrupted by a panicked apprentice urgently calling for her help. Lytia calmly offers the exhausted apprentice a drink, wryly noting that this kind of emergency is becoming familiar. The apprentice frantically begs her to come look at the agric species dragon. Lytia is confused, wondering why they're asking her to check on Kazan when the Duke should be handling him directly. The apprentice explains that Kazan has been crying every night, making the other dragons anxious. He adds that some of the more sensitive dragons even hurt themselves from the anxiety, though the injuries were minor. He reveals that Euless claimed he would handle it, but Kazan has been crying for days, so he snuck out to get her, leaving Lytia stunned. Realizing Euless lied about the situation being fine, a horrified Lytia demands to know where the dragon is. As they race toward the enclosure, Lytia is shocked she can hear Kazan's sad cries from so far away. The apprentice explains that the enclosures are located far from the mansion specifically, so cries can't be heard, highlighting how unusual this is. Suddenly, the crying stops, and the apprentice notes this has never happened before as Lytia dismounts. Lytia bursts through the enclosure door, desperately calling out Kazan's name. A weary Euless is startled by her arrival as Kazan lets out a massive, joyful roar. Overwhelmed with happiness, Kazan lovingly smothers Lytia, who sighs in relief to see him. Euless scolds her for not resting, but she retorts that no trainer could rest while their dragon is in distress. She internally notes how stubborn both Master and Dragon are, realizing they truly resemble each other. Oof. Kazan affectionately headbutts her in a happy reunion. Lytia comforts her upset dragon, then apologizes for being gone, noting that Euless was with him. She finally understands Kazan's pained expression, and why he wouldn't listen to the Duke. Her thoughts flash back to her conversation with Euless about whether agric species dragons need a pack. She recalls their strange conversation, realizing that despite his deep care for Kazan, something felt off. As Kazan gently holds her arm, Lytia realizes his behavior isn't just jealousy of another person getting close to his master. Growl Lytia pats Kazan's head, declaring that this decision won't be made by the Duke. Kazan will make it himself. The scene flashes back to Lytia and Euless, standing before Kazan in the enclosure. She realizes that from the very beginning, the Duke never intended to accept anyone into their small world of two. Shriek. A flashback shows a terrified Lytia on the ground, as Kazan lunges at her, aggressively revealing their hostile first meeting. Lytia reflects that it's natural for someone to feel disappointed when a beloved dragon of 10 years suddenly follows a stranger, calling it a mature reaction. She applies this logic to the Duke's case, viewing the scene of him watching her and Kazan from a distance. Lytia understands that the core of his initial behavior toward her was distrust. She considers the legendary deep bond between dragons and their chosen people, a connection others cannot comprehend. In a flashback, Lytia bows apologetically to Euless, taking responsibility for not anticipating Kazan's distress and vowing to correct it. Recalling her thoughts, she knew Euless didn't trust her and wanted to skip her vacation to begin training immediately. In the flashback, Euless carries the unconscious Lytia, admitting he couldn't calm Kazan himself and had no other choice but to bring her. Now, in the present, Lytia sits alone, contemplating the immense pressure of her role, knowing that one mistake could have grave consequences. Squeal. Kazan lovingly nuzzles her, and she affectionately notes he needs a bath. She looks for a lake nearby, hoping to make his bath time easier by letting him immerse himself. Ruer Kazan roars defiantly and charges, knocking Lytia to the ground. Grr! His eye glows with menace as he looms over her, clearly asserting his dominance. Unfazed, Lytia calmly sits up and brings a small whistle to her lips. Grr! Kaizen stops in his tracks, looking confused but held back by an unseen force, now casually sitting on his tail. Lydia begins to speak to him honestly, having established her authority. She despairs internally, lamenting how difficult it is to be firm with a dragon she adores and just wants to hug. Grr! She melts as she looks at Kaizen's undeniably adorable face, admitting his cuteness is overwhelming. As Kaizen nuzzles her cheek, she struggles with her resolve, telling herself she must endure for the training to work. With Kaizen now resting calmly, Lydia resolves that both he and his master need this difficult experience. She looks off into the distance, her thoughts on Kaizen and Ulyss, who is watching them from afar under a tree. Roar! Ulyss flinches as Kaizen suddenly turns and charges him with a ferocious roar. Pinned to the ground by his dragon, a stunned Ulyss asks, Kaizen? In a moment of pure confusion, a dazed Ulyss questions what is happening. Lydia smiles, asking if this isn't the behavioral correction he requested. Still trapped under a surprisingly gentle Kaizen, Ulyss admits he did, but questions how she achieved this in a single day. He internally recalls Kaizen crying for her for 5 straight days, and wonders if she used some kind of trick. Ulyss's reflection appears in Kaizen's eye as he begins to understand. He gently places a hand on his dragon's head, feeling their connection. Ulyss realizes it isn't a lie. Kaizen is genuinely happy to see him, and this change isn't a rejection. Lydia watches the two of them, a satisfied look on her face. She informs the Duke she must leave to train the other apprentices, explaining her absence is also part of the training. Her expression is firm, showing her confidence in her training methods. As she walks away, Ulyss, still on the ground with his dragon, quietly apologizes. Ulyss reflects on how Kaizen has never cried out for anyone else before, finally grasping the situation. Lydia smiles knowingly, pleased with the outcome of her lesson. She mentally pats herself on the back, noting that Ulyss's reaction seems positive. As Lydia departs, Ulyss pats Kaizen, feeling relieved that their bond is on the mend. Ulyss now happily embraces his dragon, their misunderstanding finally resolved. The scene transitions to the bustling grounds of the dragon stables. Several probationary trainers, including the one who fetched her, excitedly call out to trainer Lydia. Lydia greets them, and they explain that the dragons were just sent out to the training grounds. Seeing their nervous faces, she playfully wonders if she intimidated them that much during her first assessment. Announcing she's starting training a day early, Lydia asks to see the dragons, and a griffin peeks its head out with a grunt. Kayak! She greets the friendly creature, learning that one dragon, belonging to Lord Bascal, is walked separately from the main pack. As the griffin nuzzles her, she curiously asks who Lord Bascal is. Ah, you mean him. Lydia recognizes the elegant blonde-haired man with glasses who has just appeared. A trainer whispers that the man's rare Panthera stalker dragon was specially brought by the Duke of Alberant. Lydia's mind connects the dots, recalling that the Duke and the Duke of Alberant are close childhood friends. A trainer explains to Lydia that Lord Bascal's dragon is a highly sensitive maselid species. Lydia peers into a dark enclosure, where a pair of fierce blue eyes gleam menacingly. Sensing the creature's distress, she approaches the cage and asks if something is wrong. Kia. A white dragon lunges from the darkness with a ferocious roar, shouting for its trainer. The apprentices rush to Lydia's side, anxiously asking if she's all right after the sudden outburst. Waving off their concern with a smile, Lydia confidently reassures them that she's fine. A scarred trainer asks who is in charge of the maselid species, and another trainer points him to Lydia. Lydia asks the scarred trainer for any details about the dragon's unusual behavior, however small. He explains the dragon, Luira, is naturally sensitive and highly reactive, but dismisses it as her normal temperament. Lydia questions his assessment, her expression sharp as she suspects there is more to the story. She realizes the dragon's behavior must stem from a previous change in ownership. A tanned trainer explains that the change happened during the Alberant ducal house's succession disputes. He grimly adds that the dragon's previous owner and trainer both died, a fact he's lucky not to know more about. Lydia understands that such a traumatic loss would explain Luira's extreme sensitivity. She reflects that an intelligent dragon would know its former master was gone forever when a new one appeared. The tanned trainer begins to ask Lydia a shameless favor regarding the troubled dragon. The three men look on with grim anticipation, waiting for her response. The scarred trainer reveals that Luira's current owner is a woman named Lady Durna. Surprised, Lydia wonders aloud if the owner is an alchemist. The scene shifts to an opulent office inside the grand ducal estate. Eulis looks up from his work, confirming that she must mean Durna, the alchemist. Lydia stands before his desk as he senses her urgency and asks if something is wrong. Lydia asks for permission to speak frankly, and he pauses his writing to listen. He grants her permission, and she prepares to state her case with a determined look. Lydia explains that while every dragon has problems, Luira's situation is the most urgent. A quiet moment shows Luira's tale, a stark contrast to her inner turmoil. Eulis asks if Luira is likely to cause an incident, and Lydia gravely confirms it. She admits she foresaw this possibility, given the lack of experienced trainers at the estate. Eulis gives an unexpected compliment, praising her management with only apprentices and expressing faith in their potential, which surprises Lydia. Lydia admits to herself that under such difficult conditions, she would have simply quit. Eulis declares that any trainer who fails to meet standards in a year will be dismissed, citing the major incident with the heroes. Lydia boldly counters, proposing that she will ensure every apprentice becomes licensed within the year. The two face each other in a tense standoff, their wills clashing across the desk. Lydia internally scolds herself for falling into old habits and turning the negotiation into a power struggle. To her complete shock, Eulis agrees to her terms without a fight, leaving her speechless. He tells her that, as the expert, she would know best what is needed. Eulis hands her an official, wax-sealed scroll, granting her the authority she requested. With the scroll in hand, Lydia departs from the Duke's office. Walking down the hall, she considers her next move, knowing it won't be easy to get Durna out of her lab. Eulis's voice echoes in her mind, instructing her to show Durna the ducal decree if she resists. Lydia marvels at how easily he approved, realizing she now has to manage both Kazan and Luira simultaneously. Deciding it was a lucky break, she resolves to focus on the immediate task. She arrives at a set of large doors and knocks firmly. Pausing, she asks if anyone is there, sensing something is amiss. The door creaks open, revealing a disheveled, dark-haired woman, and Lydia asks who she is. The woman introduces herself as Durna, the alchemist of the aberrant ducal house. Kia. A small black creature hisses as Durna confirms her identity and asks who Lydia is. Lydia smiles proudly, presenting the ducal scroll and introducing herself as the new exclusive trainer. As Durna inspects the scroll, Lydia feels nervous tension, as if she's in a job interview. Relieved, Lydia celebrates internally as Durna invites her in, thanking her for the approval. Lydia steps into Durna's lab, a chaotic space overflowing with scattered books and research materials. Inside the cluttered room, Durna awkwardly asks what brings the new trainer to her laboratory. Lydia grabs Durna's arm, getting straight to the point and confirming she's the master of the dragon, Luira. Durna pulls away in fright, her panicked reaction leaving Lydia momentarily confused. Durna anxiously asks if something happened with Luira, quickly asserting that the dragon hasn't caused an accident and isn't sick. Lydia warns that there's a high risk of an incident and recommends behavioral correction, prompting Durna to ask if she can do it. Lydia explains that training requires the owner's permission and is far more effective with their involvement, stressing that Luira needs her master. Lydia dismissively argues that Luira has always been this way since she became her master, questioning why it's a problem now. Durna avoids her gaze as Lydia addresses her directly as Lady Durna, refusing to let the matter drop. Lydia presses Durna, asking how often she visits Luira and for how long, but Durna falters, unable to answer. The tense silence stretches as Lydia calls out Lady Durna's name again, her expression demanding an answer. With a stern gaze, Lydia sits patiently, waiting for Durna to finally speak. Lydia cuts to the heart of the matter, asking Durna if she truly cares about Luira. As Durna hesitates, Lydia lets out a quiet sigh of frustration. Lydia suggests that if Luira is a burden, Durna should consider giving her to someone else, especially if she only needs the water the species produces. "No!" Durna shouts, leaping to her feet and insisting that she can't hand Luira over to anyone. Lydia internally reflects on stubborn owners who claim to be a dragon's rightful master but refuse to let go. Her thoughts continue, noting that even when their actions border on abuse, they loudly declare ownership, a sentiment that visibly horrifies Durna. Durna stands frozen, clearly pained and conflicted by Lydia's harsh but unspoken accusation. Durna finally breaks, explaining that she tried desperately to get close to Luira, but the dragon would never open up to her. She tearfully recalls that she still doesn't know what she did wrong, only that Luira was unusually sensitive on the day of the attack. A traumatic flashback shows a hand lying in a pool of blood as Durna remembers the searing pain. Durna reveals a massive, jagged scar on her abdomen, explaining the wound was so deep her organs nearly spilled out. Lydia says she understands the situation but is now even more confused, asking why Durna still refuses her suggestion to give Luira up. Lydia explains that many trainers quit after developing trauma from such injuries, but Durna tearfully repeats that she can't send Luira away. Lydia is taken aback, realizing Durna's refusal stems from something deeper than fear. Overcome with emotion, Durna collapses and sobs, revealing that Luira was her father's dragon. Kneeling on the floor, Durna confesses she doesn't want to abandon Luira, but starts shaking uncontrollably whenever she faces her. The scene shifts to Euless, who is relaxing with Kazan and wondering if Durna will request more magical tools. Back with Euless, Lydia confirms that his assumption about the tools is correct. Euless correctly deduces the tools are for Luira, and Lydia confirms it's the priority for now, earning a slight grumble from Kazan. Euless looks at her intently, questioning what she means by, for now. Lydia explains that while every dragon has problems, Luira's situation is the most urgent. Euless clarifies the tool's future use, and then asks if Lydia knew Durna was injured by Luira, his grip on Kazan tightening. Euless smirks, admitting he knew, and that he personally dismissed Luira's previous trainer because of the incident. Lydia sighs, realizing her initial assumption that the trainer was simply fired was correct after all. Euless cryptically adds that the dismissal wasn't the kind she's imagining, leaving her confused. He explains that Durna's family has practiced alchemy for generations, passing down guarded, secret techniques. He then poses a chilling question. What might happen if a trainer tried to use Luira to steal those secrets? As the horrifying truth dawns on Lydia, Euless confirms the trainer was a spy, sent to eliminate Durna's entire family of alchemists. Lydia asks if Durna is aware, but Euless explains she was too shocked by Luira's attack to fully grasp the betrayal. Euless shakes his head, remarking on how absurd it is that such a tragedy happened over something so stupid. Overwhelmed by the story's tragic weight, Lydia sinks to her knees in the grass. Lydia realizes with sorrow that Durna still blames herself for the attack, not knowing Luira was protecting her. It's noted that a dragon won't easily open their heart, and it's impossible to know how high Luira's emotional walls have become. As an image of Luira crying out in pain appears, Lydia is overwhelmed by the sadness of the situation. The scene returns to the lab, where Durna stands with her back to Lydia. Durna explains that Luira sometimes cries in a way that is so full of sorrow, it makes her want to cry too. This, she explains, is why she can't give Luira away. She wants to tell her they aren't alone in their grief. With a sad smile, Durna admits she's too clumsy to get her feelings across, and asks Lydia if she would be willing to train her. Lydia crouches, filled with determination as she wonders if Luira can truly be changed. Nearby, Kazan gives a questioning nudge to Euless, getting his attention. Euless stands with his arms crossed, watching intently as Kazan's tail curls around him. As Kazan silently asks what to do, Euless simply instructs him to do what he does best. Kazan hesitates, worrying he can't do anything if his master is angry. Gring. Kazan approaches the deep in thought Lydia, gently interrupting her. Lydia turns with a gentle smile, petting the red dragon and asking if he was worried about her. She warmly embraces Kazan, showing her deep affection for the dragon. Observing them, Euless thinks her sudden change of gaze seems awfully insolent. Lydia mentally sighs, resolving to accept whatever challenge his grace has in mind. She reflects that this isn't a bad outcome, as some distance might help with Kazan's gloominess. Ahem. Lydia clears her throat, calling Kazan's name to get his attention. She beams with a brilliant smile, presenting her idea to the dragon. Purr. Kazan lets out a roar, exploding with pure excitement. Lydia praises him for waiting so calmly, promising that good kids deserve a reward. Euless recalls his reasoning, admitting it's better to agree with Lydia than to provoke a duke's displeasure. With a hopeful smile, Lydia peeks into the area, housing the troubled dragon. Looking through the enclosure bars, she gently calls out Luira's name. A low growl is her only answer, as Lydia notes that even calming incense isn't working on the withdrawn dragon. Trainer Russell suggests making the door transparent, and Lydia agrees it's possible. A gloved hand places a magical tool onto the solid door. The door turns invisible, revealing Luira huddled defensively in the hay. "Good then," Lydia says decisively, ready to begin her patient work. The concerned Trainer Russell asks if she really intends to stay there. Lydia confirms she'll be stationed there outside of her time with Kazan, offering her support. A flashback reveals Trainer Russell simply tolerated Luira, maintaining stability without any real affection. The narration notes that Luira, huddled in the corner, likely doesn't welcome this necessary process. Lydia sets up a desk, patiently working nearby to let the dragon acclimate to her presence. Luira peeks out from her hiding spot, her eye filled with cautious curiosity. Laughing, Lydia asks if she smells like another dragon, relieved that Kazan seems less sensitive than expected. She sees his slight displeasure as a win-win, hoping it will help him get used to other dragons. 2 weeks into her vigil, Lydia's patient watch over Luira's enclosure continues. She and Trainer Russell take shifts, with Lydia napping at her desk after a long morning watch. Lydia's constant, non-threatening presence has clearly begun to ease Luira's tension. The dragon, who once hid, now cautiously approaches to sniff Lydia, showing clear progress. Seeing this progress, Lydia decides it might finally be time to bring in Lady Durna. Grung, Kazan interrupts her thoughts, and she asks why he isn't walking around. He presents her with a small bouquet of flowers, held gently in his mouth. "Wahaha, Lydia!" bursts out laughing, delighted by his gift, as he grunts in confirmation. She playfully cuddles the large dragon, calling him a living volcano for his warm affection. Holding the flowers, she marvels at how such simple gestures can be so cute. Kazan's mood darkens as he seems to realize that Lydia won't stay with him forever. Grrrrt, he throws a small tantrum, which Lydia clinically identifies as the behavior of a child. The realization hits her with the force of an epiphany. He's acting just like a child. The scene shifts, marking the passage of time and a new phase in her plan. Lydia glances at a nervous Durna, who asks if she'll be okay and tells her not to force it. Though her hands tremble, Durna insists she can manage, as long as she stays outside the enclosure. Lydia places a supportive hand on her shoulder, promising to stay right beside her. She encourages Durna to simply say hi, trying to ease the alchemist's overwhelming fear. With Lydia at her side, a nervous Durna steels herself at the entrance to the enclosure, ready to face Luira. As Durna takes her first tentative step inside, a low growl echoes from the darkness. Luira watches warily from the hay as Durna softly greets her, announcing her arrival. Durna trembles while apologizing for her long absence, as Lydia notes that Luira is more wary of her own master than a stranger. Lydia observes the tense reunion, realizing Luira's fearful reaction is far worse than she anticipated. Durna's gentle call is met with a vicious snap from Luira, causing the terrified alchemist to cry out. "Eep." Lydia quickly intervenes, grabbing Durna's arm and telling her that's enough for now. Kiwa Luira lunges forward in a furious attack, forcing Lydia to shield the horrified Durna. Lydia holds the terrified Durna, her expression filled with concern as she comforts her. Lydia realizes with dawning horror that Luira's lunge wasn't just a threat. Her thoughts race as she understands Luira genuinely attacked to kill, but the shocking part wasn't Durna's fear. In a flash of insight, Lydia realizes the true target of Luira's aggression was her. Luira pants heavily, her eyes still fixed on them with burning hostility. Lydia instructs a shaken Durna to trust her and to act as if she is casting Lydia out. Lydia lays out the plan. Durna must push her away, and after she leaves, Durna must speak gently to Luira before exiting herself. She acknowledges it will be frightening, but insists it's necessary to mend their broken relationship. Summoning her courage, Durna shoves Lydia back, committing to the difficult act. A chibi fantasy shows a confused Luira watching as Lydia goads a hesitant Durna into pushing her harder. Lydia's voice urges Durna on, telling her she must clearly reject her for Luira to see. Durna shoves Lydia again, and Luira watches the confrontation with focused intensity. Playing her part, Durna angrily declares she is leaving as Lydia tumbles to the ground. From just out of sight, Lydia gives a satisfied smile, silently praising Durna for her convincing performance. Durna shakily agrees to the plan, telling Lydia to call if she needs her. Now alone with Durna, Luira watches her master with a surprisingly placid expression. A low growl makes Durna flinch, her fear returning in an instant. Recalling Lydia's instructions, Dirna braces herself with an anguished ugh, preparing to speak to the dragon. Dirna hastily apologizes for the short visit before turning to flee, as Luira simply watches. Dirna runs out of the enclosure, leaving the dragon alone once more. Luira watches her leave, her expression softening into one of quiet contemplation. Later, Dirna sits in defeat, lamenting that she wishes she had done better. Lydia quickly comforts her, insisting that the disastrous encounter was not her fault. Lydia explains that the one truly at fault, the traitorous former trainer, isn't even there. Dirna echoes the word victims as Lydia states that, for now, she considers both of them to be victims of circumstance. Lydia firmly tells Dirna that Luira doesn't hate her, but Dirna counters by pointing out the dragon's earlier aggression. Lydia reveals the crucial truth. Luira wasn't targeting Dirna. She was targeting Lydia. Dirna can't believe it, as Lydia admits she was also surprised by Luira's uncharacteristic behavior. Lydia explains that Luira had previously obeyed her orders perfectly, both with and without Dirna present. Dirna morosely adds that whenever she gave Luira an order, she was always ignored. That's the issue, Lydia says, her sharp declaration leaving Dirna completely baffled. The two women sit across from each other, the weight of the complicated situation hanging between them. Lydia looks at Dirna with a serious expression, acknowledging this problem won't be a quick fix. She states they must continue with difficult sessions, and asks Dirna if she has the strength to persevere. A glimmer of hope appears in Dirna's eyes, as she asks if things can truly improve, and if she doesn't have to give up on her father's dragon. Lydia looks away, admitting that a positive outcome is something she cannot promise. Lydia gently takes Dirna's hands, offering her support and comfort in this uncertain journey. Dirna looks around the room, sadly admitting that she knows she's not good enough. Lydia watches her with an expression of profound sympathy and understanding. Overwhelmed by despair and a sliver of hope, Dirna finally breaks down, weeping into her hands. The scene shifts to the bright, sunny exterior of the estate, marking a moment of peace. Inside her enclosure, Luira is finally resting, sleeping soundly in the hay. From Luira's perspective, inside the enclosure, she watches the entrance, her thoughts fixed on that human. Her gaze falls on Dirna's boots as she recalls the weak, trembling child of her former master. Luira continues to watch, her blue eyes calm and calculating. Dirna stands before the enclosure, her expression now resolute and firm. Luira lets out a threatening growl, but Dirna remains unfazed. The white dragon lunges forward in a blur of motion. Luira continues to snarl aggressively, but Dirna's sharp command, "No, Luira," makes the dragon pause in confusion. Now docile, Luira stands obediently before Dirna. The two face each other in a tense standoff, the white dragon awaiting a command. Luira submits, lowering her head as Dirna glares down, infuriated by the dragon's earlier perception of her as weak. As Luira roars, Dirna furiously shouts that she dares not call her weak. Observing the intense confrontation, Lydia notes that Luira is difficult to manage after years of dominating Dirna. Lydia turns away, muttering that, with Luira's unchecked behavior, someone was bound to get her eventually. With a confident smile, Lydia's resolve hardens. Lydia approaches Kazan, telling the senior dragon it's time for a little scolding. Dirna looks startled as Lydia formally addresses her as Lady Dirna. Dirna greets Trainer Lydia, who stands beside Kazan, and she nervously identifies him as the famous Agrex-class dragon. Dirna marvels at Kazan's incredible size, and Lydia agrees he is amazing. Gurk? Luira watches from her enclosure, confused and alarmed by the new dragon's presence. Kang. As Dirna reaches for Kazan, Luira suddenly lunges forward in a panic. Dirna watches in shock as the dragons face off, but Lydia firmly tells her not to stop the confrontation. As Luira cowers before Kazan, the narration explains she must submit or risk Dirna turning to another dragon. Lydia watches coolly, admitting to herself that this harsh truth is necessary. Kiek, as Luira shrieks in defiance, Lydia resolves to intervene herself if Dirna hesitates. Kazan moves with purpose, firmly pinning the struggling white dragon to the ground. GRRK. Luira whimpers in submission, her defiance finally broken as she trembles in fear. Dirna expresses her concern over Luira's crying, but Lydia reassures her that it's a necessary part of the process. Later, outside, Lydia checks in on a shaken Dirna, asking if she's all right. A chibi graphic explains the potion of courage Derna took, which she says worked despite her racing heart. Lydia praises Derna's performance and instructs her to stay away from Luira's enclosure for a week to let things settle. Derna remains silent, her expression filled with worry over Luira's reaction. Lydia returns to Kazan, affectionately petting the red dragon and congratulating him on a job well done. Derna blushes, a mix of gratitude and embarrassment washing over her. Overwhelmed with emotion, Derna bows deeply to Lydia and thanks for her help. Inside her enclosure, Luira lets out a great roar, seemingly releasing her pent-up frustration and fear. A week later, Lydia waits patiently by a large tree. A frantic Derna rushes over, calling out to trainer Lydia in surprise. Derna anxiously peppers Lydia with questions about Luira's health, eating habits, and walks. With a warm, reassuring smile, Lydia suggests Derna see for herself and encourages her to go quickly. Despite her confident words, Lydia watches with concern as Derna nervously follows. Derna nervously approaches the enclosure, calling out Luira's name and worrying how the dragon will react. Luira lifts her head from the hay, her expression unreadable as Derna fears this new method has also failed. Derna gently asks if Luira is hurt, and the dragon responds with a soft, questioning sound. Luira suddenly stands and walks toward Derna with purpose. "You!" The white dragon cries out with tears in her eyes, rushing toward her master. Derna is completely stunned by this unexpected emotional display, while Lydia observes calmly. Lydia gently prompts a nervous and blushing Derna to try speaking to Luira. As Derna hesitantly reaches out her hand, Luira gently presses her snout against it in a sign of trust. Luira affectionately nuzzles against a shocked and overjoyed Derna, who embraces her dragon. Lydia watches in confusion as Derna tearfully remarks that this is the first time Luira has ever acted this way. Lydia explains she simply made Luira understand that Derna is the only one who truly cares for her. From her room, Derna looks determined as Lydia's voiceover states this is only the beginning of rebuilding their bond. The scene shifts to Lydia, who looks on with a serious expression. Lydia smiles warmly, as she is thanked for her invaluable help. A beaming Derna joyfully embraces Luira, her face flushed with happiness. With their task complete for now, Derna bows deeply to Lydia in thanks. Lydia stretches triumphantly, celebrating that they have successfully passed the first hurdle. Her thoughts on the future are interrupted by 3 trainees, as she asks if something is wrong with Bruce. Haha, Bruce laughs, explaining that he's simply amazed, prompting Lydia to ask if he means Luira. Lydia agrees, admitting she's also amazed watching Luira gradually become more sensitive and sharp. Her pleasant thought is cut short by a sudden shocking realization. A vision of the Duke at his desk flashes in her mind as she remembers she completely forgot her deal with him. Lydia approaches Bruce, asking if he's the longest-serving employee, and he confirms he's worked there for over 10 years. She excitedly asks for a moment of his time, and Bruce readily agrees. Bruce scratches his head, looking completely flustered by her sudden interest. As Lydia corners the nervous man, he can only manage a week. Lydia's narration explains that the other trainees have more than enough skill and experience to become official trainers. A close-up on Bruce's worried face highlights the narration's point that their treatment will change once they are licensed. Bruce tells Lydia that getting licensed means they won't have to worry about being kicked out, but she thinks it will still be difficult. A nervous Bruce asks why she believes that. The two continue their serious discussion outside the stables. A thought bubble shows Lydia flustered by Bruce's unexpected response to her concerns. Bruce explains he's unmarried and lives comfortably, admitting studying doesn't suit him, while Lydia notes the gap between experience and books. Lydia reminds him of the Duke's ultimatum: prove their worth in a year or face dismissal. Bruce looks down, realizing this problem affects more than just him. A fractured memory shows the trainees as Lydia wonders how they could lack standards after passing the Duke's loyalty tests. When asked if the other trainees feel the same way, a chibi Bruce sweats and stays silent. As the truth shatters around her, Lydia realizes she is doomed. Bruce confirms the other trainees share his opinion. Grabbing his arm, Lydia insists she can't take back her promise to the Duke, and a startled Bruce addresses her as Trainer Lydia. With fierce determination, Lydia declares she wants all the trainees to get certified and stay at the Duke's house. A deeply moved Bruce embraces Lydia as she clarifies she isn't ignoring his years of experience. Lydia argues that certification textbooks contain the accumulated knowledge of thousands and are statistically more reliable than any one person's experience. Huh? Lydia suddenly shouts that everyone is actually motivated to get certified, leaving Bruce utterly confused. Ha! Bruce sighs, explaining that no one asked for her help because they thought she was too busy and didn't want to be a burden. He insists her contribution is impressive, as she's found a way to achieve something they couldn't for years. Lydia looks up at the colorful sky, pondering his heartfelt words. A small chibi Bruce regrets having spilled all of their secrets. Bruce earnestly tells Lydia that his words were sincere and that it would be a waste if skilled people quit after a year. Lydia jokes that if they quit, she'd be the one working herself to death, which Bruce admits makes sense. Lydia proposes a study plan of 3 evenings a week, and Bruce agrees on behalf of everyone. Bruce formally asks if they can rely on her for help from now on. They seal their new partnership with a firm handshake. Later that night, a happy Derna hums to herself while strolling along a moonlit veranda. She smiles, reflecting on how genuinely happy she has felt recently. She admits she was getting worn out by Luira's aggression and had often considered giving up for both their sakes. As the Duke watches from a distance, Derna concludes that her newfound happiness is all thanks to trainer Lydia. The Duke stands with his arms crossed, watching Derna with a cool, assessing gaze. Derna is startled to find the Duke waiting for her, and he calmly addresses her by name. Holding up a chest, Derna confirms that yes, of course, she has finished everything she promised. The Duke notes her good spirits and asks if everything is going well with Luira. Derna proudly tells the Duke that thanks to Lydia, she can now touch Luira's nose, asking if he thinks it's amazing. The Duke chuckles, agreeing that trainer Lydia is quite capable, leaving Derna slightly puzzled by his response. Derna's expression turns serious as she processes his words. The scene shifts to Lydia and Bruce in a study, where she looks on with a stern expression. The Duke reveals that in exchange for caring for Luira, Lydia also agreed to train the apprentice handlers, shocking Derna. With a pleased smile, the Duke expresses his gladness that they hired the right trainer. Derna looks on thoughtfully as she absorbs this new information. Derna nervously addresses the Duke, who coolly asks what she wants. She hesitantly asks if he is still having trouble sleeping, catching him by surprise. He curtly dismisses her, stating it's not her concern as he walks away. Derna persists, warning him against long-term sleeping pill use and mentioning she is working with the healer. The Duke continues to walk away, ignoring her words. Derna is left standing alone as he departs down the long corridor. She watches him leave with a look of deep concern. Standing before a large set of doors, Derna silently wishes the Duke could open his heart one day. The scene transitions under a beautiful, starry night sky. Later, Lydia poses a hypothetical question to herself about finding her employer sleeping with his dragon. She imagines finding the Duke asleep in Kaizen's pen, with the dragon groaning in protest. A chibi Lydia decides to enter quietly, finding the Duke asleep beside Kaizen. An illustrative panel shows Lydia leaning against the mighty red dragon Kaizen. Lydia pauses, looking conflicted and a little flustered. The Duke sleeps peacefully, surrounded by a magical aura of roses. Lydia sits near the sleeping Duke, wishing he were less uptight, but concluding it's not her place to hope for more. She hesitates to wake him, but decides she has to. Lydia reasons that it is Kaizen's mealtime and that a Duke shouldn't be sleeping here. As she reaches for him, he springs awake, grabbing her arm and drawing a dagger in a flash. Startled from his sleep, the Duke warily asks who is there. Lydia stares back in wide-eyed shock, a small cut now visible on her neck. With the dagger held to her throat, the Duke begins to say her name.